Mini episode number 200 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.info.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FDH Lounge. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris. We're here with a really big one for you today. This is mini episode number 200, and we've chosen the subject matter for this one that we think is very fitting. If you go back to the very beginning of the FDH Lounge, way before the 200 mini episodes, when you get into the 152 full-length episodes, the first one that we ever did, January 14th, 2007, already we were looking ahead to the 2008 presidential election. We were talking about it the first couple of shows. That was the longest election cycle in American political history. You had freaking presidential debates in the spring of 2007, just to kind of illustrate where we were. But we kind of planted the flag really early with this show. Again, then when we created the FDH brand and when we branched out from our Fantasy Draft Help identity, which we still have going, by the way, check out fantasydrafthelp.com with our hockey and hoops guides that just went online this week. But when we branched outside of sports and we decided nothing is off topic on this show, okay, pop culture, entertainment, those things kind of take care of themselves. We knew we'd be good on that. But as far as news goes, if you really want to kind of broaden out, what do people care about more than the presidential election? You have people glued to this thing every 4 years like no other news story in between, no other regularly scheduled news story, that is. Obviously, a 9/11 enthralls people, as horrible as that is. But it's the presidential election that really grabs people. So it seems very fitting that for our landmark 200th mini episode that we devoted to this topic, our final preview of the presidential election here for 2012. And to do that, it's really fitting to bring back on with us somebody who's been on some of our full-length episodes and our mini episodes that we've done subsequently since then. One of our favorite recurring guests over a period of time. I'm going to recommend to all of you, check out the bookend to today's segment. It's mini episode number 119. We covered this through the end of the primaries. We knew it was going to be Romney v. Obama in the fall. So we're basically going to pick up from the spring/summer of 2012 and take it forward with, as I say, one of our favorite recurring guests, the proprietor of epolitics.com, good friend of the show, Colin Delany. Colin, welcome back to the program, my friend. So glad you could be with us here today to break down the closing stretch run of this race.
Hey, Rick, how are you doing, man? Listen, it was tough to get over here tonight because I was so busy filing all my binders full of women. You know, it takes a long time when you got binders that just are full of women, my friend.
That is outstanding. I understand that as of the morning after the debate, 270,000 followers to a new Facebook page around these binders full of women. God loves social media and the ability to pick up a gap immediately. How about that, Colin?
Well, seriously, and honestly, I think to make a serious point, I think that what we saw last night, because this was the first, the other two debates, I was in a crowd situation when I was watching them, but this time I was sitting at home and I was sitting on the Twitter, and it was absolutely fascinating to see the kinds of things that individual people pick up on that I think 20 years ago would have been completely ignored, right, by the traditional media. Like the binder, the binders of women was one thing, and you know what Romney was getting at. He was trying to make a reasonable point. He just is not always very artful. And David Gergen, or one of the traditional guys that was judging the debates 10, 20 years ago on the talking heads on TV, they probably would have let that slip by. But oh my God, within minutes, I saw more fantastic jokes fly across the internet. There was a Romney binder Twitter feed within about a minute and a half. There was a Tumblr blog, the Facebook page. I checked about 11 this morning, and it was up to 273,000 followers. This is the kind of thing that sticks around potentially. Now, how many votes is it going to sway? I don't know. But it might persuade some people to go to the polls who might have stayed home otherwise.
You know what's one of the really interesting things about this, before we backtrack a little further in the race, but while we're on this right now, Colin, it strikes me that what social media does, and I don't know that it necessarily tells us anything about the outcome of a race, but I'm seeing the same things you are. And by the way, what you just said explains why I saw tweets from you last night. I didn't remember it during the previous debates here, but you were all over my feed last night, and I was glad to see that. But this really is the nexus, is it not, between the news of what happens in a debate and basically pop culture. This is a pop culture thing when you're seeing binders full of women here, whatever. I mean, yeah, there's a point behind it, but it's people making a joke. It's people guffawing about it. How can I take this and be clever and be funny? It's really interesting that it provides a direct nexus to the world of entertainment and pop culture that we didn't have in past presidential years.
I think you're right on with that. Yeah, no, that, well, and, maybe it is that, everything kind of gets pop culturized at this point, that we see everything through that lens. But I think, Twitter especially, Twitter, is good for some things in politics. It's not so good at, mobilizing voters, that sort of thing. But it is really good at getting a message out there. And, yeah, I know my thing on Twitter last night, it was moving too fast for me to come up with anything good. I was just trying to retweet the funny stuff other people were saying and amplify a little bit.
I was doing that as well. That's kind of what I do. Once in a while I might make a comment, but it's really kind of funny as you're seeing it happen, and particularly for somebody like me, where, again, as we've established previously, you being somewhat left of center, me being a paleocon, you've got a point of view in this thing. I actually don't. I hate them both, so it's a thing of where right. I'm kind of policing myself, because I know most of the things on my feed frankly, are people who are very pro-Romney, and I got to be honest with you, I find a lot of it so embarrassing. I just don't want to get lumped in with that kind of stuff. There is so much, and it's on both sides, to be fair. Man, there is so much binary mouth-breather stuff here. I have never, ever in my life wanted a presidential election to be behind me. I'm the kind of guy, and I've talked to friends who've said the same thing. I like the conventions, the vice presidential selection. I like all of it. God, I can't wait for this thing to be over with, Colin. I don't know how much you're hearing that from other people, but I would guess I'm not the only one.
Well, most of us, the tension gets to you after a while. Now, I know, we've talked about this before, various beefs with the Republican establishment. What specifically about Romney gets stuck in your craw?
Okay, well, very interesting. Again, I'll tell you what. And again, he's such a flip-flopper, for one thing. I don't trust him. For somebody that didn't trust the Bush family, right. And when you look at the explosion of spending, I see him as the next George Bush in that family. And it's a thing where, I'll tell you what, as somebody who was a Rick Perry partisan, who was screaming at the TV during the spring debates, I feel like last night is the first time we saw this. The thing there of where he's over there by Obama, I'll let you talk in a minute. Let me finish. That's the first time we've seen that smarmy douche in front of the whole nation that I saw so many times previously, and I don't think it wears well. Again, I get told by a lot of people, a lot of my friends that are down the line Republicans, Colin, again, that they find my thoughts on him irrational, and I got to tell you, this has been one of the big shocks since the last time we talked. I thought that there would be a lot more people like me, a lot more resistance to falling in behind the guy, but it has been this complete binary kind of a thing on the Republican side. Again, I know you've detailed in the past some of your problems with Obama, but there was never a question you were going to be behind him. We're seeing so much of that on the Republican side, and it just shocks the hell out of me. People are completely forgetting all the reservations that they had about the guy. I guess to answer your question, I don't forget what I said during the primaries. The rest of the world does, apparently, Colin.
No, I hear you. And there is an old line that gets repeated all the time that Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line, right? That Republicans are very good, and you can really see it in the debate response. I mean, after Obama, like you and I would be having a very different conversation right now if this were 2 weeks ago, because Obama did not show up 2 weeks ago. That was downright embarrassingly bad. And actually, Jon Stewart, of all people, caught it very well because, he, on one of his shows a day or two after the debate, pulled up a bunch of Obama email subject lines, all of these urgent, help now, you are needed, da-da-da, that the campaign has created this sense of urgency in its followers. And then the guy who showed up 2 weeks ago looked like he was sleepwalking, So Democrats then turned around and freaked out. Now, I have a suspicion, and I haven't really seen this written, but I just have a kind of a feeling, there was a lot of pent-up frustration on the left with Obama, right? Drone strikes, surveillance. There are plenty of ways that the left is really unhappy with Obama, but you kind of swallow it because he's your guy and you agree with him like 70% of the time. I kind of have the feeling that dissatisfaction with his policies, it finally had an outlet when he screwed up at the debate. You know what I mean? That people were like, things that they were mad at him for other reasons, it boiled over for that. That being said, Obama is good at learning from his mistakes, and he certainly put in a different kind of performance last night. And, God knows, how much of a difference it's going to make. It certainly made a difference to the Democratic base.
It's interesting, Colin, and I do want to backtrack here and get to some of the stuff since we last talked. We're in such a tasty groove talking about the moment. I want to stay on this right now and ask you a follow-up on that, because it's my sense, and again, having established that I am not a Mitt Romney partisan, what I'm about to say will by no means be viewed in that light. But as somebody who is somewhat of a traditionalist about not just my politics, but how I like to see them presented, I find Biden and Obama's things, I think they were effective. I think they won, but I question whether it's going to go over with everybody, because I'm going to use the word unpresidential here. We don't typically see that from an incumbent. There were no debates in 1948. Harry Truman probably would have been like that. The closest I think we've seen to an incumbent do that was 2000 with Al Gore, who was a quasi-incumbent running as the vice president. That didn't seem to go over so well. Are you getting any kind of a sense about this, that a president, it generally pulls his punches more? The Bushes did, Clinton did. Presidents don't generally go at it like this. Vice presidents sometimes, I guess, as we've established, but it was a little jarring to me in a sense. To me, it's unprecedented.
Well, my friend, one thing that I have learned in life to not trust is memory. And if we went back when Bill Clinton played the saxophone on Arsenio Hall, that was called unpresidential, and he won. You know what I mean? Our memory of the past is always gauzy. We cherry pick what we see. 20 years ago, my God, I can barely tell you, what state I was living in. Although I was Texas, I was working in the Texas legislature. I was following politics closely, so I can't actually tell you. But unpresidential, presidential. Those are words that commentators use to describe it when somebody does something that kind of gets on their nerves, right? And it's projecting an opinion out and sort of implying or trying to make it seem as though other people share it. But I don't know how other people are going to respond to it. All I know is how the Democratic partisans responded to it, and they loved it. And that actually may well matter a lot more. Because in this election, a lot of these swing states are probably going to go by a few thousand votes. And if your base is fired up and the other guy's base isn't, that gives you a big advantage. I mean, when we get down, if you want to start, at some point we need to start talking about the dynamics of the race. Because to me, so much of what's going to happen in 3 weeks is going to be it's going to be a chance to see whether a ground organization lives up to its potential, right? In politics, you have the air war versus the ground war. And the Republicans this cycle have invested very heavily in the air war, in large part because it's these independent expenditures, right? They don't do independent expenditures typically don't do grassroots well. They're a small organization. They're run by a small group of people. They get money. They put it into TV because that's what that kind of thing can do well. Where Obama has been rebuilding his grassroots organization for a year and a half. The rule of thumb is that a good grassroots operation can increase your turnout by 3 or 4%. We're going to put that to the test this time.
True. No, that's absolutely true. One more follow-up on that, because, again, I think that there was something to be said on both sides about the second presidential debate. As I indicated, again, I found Romney's thing of it was distasteful. I'll let you talk in a minute. I'm not done talking yet. I found that distasteful. Having said that, and again, I don't know if you're quite relating to my point, maybe not. The thing about Obama, we're used to seeing presidents who are above it all a little bit more, if that kind of makes sense. And it's a thing where there's hitting back, but there's hitting back when you're unabashedly wearing brass knuckles. Presidents don't generally wave brass knuckles at the audience. And in fairness, I don't know how Obama splits that particular atom. That's a tough thing to do. What I'm talking about here, but
way
too
far the other way. He went way too far the other way the first time.
Well, exactly. He was pretty much. I think at that point he was too much trying. Okay, I'm the president. I'm whatever. I can't sing. I can't whatever at the level of this guy. But I might be trying to be too fine here. I think there's a sweet spot to be aggressive without waving the proverbial brass knuckles at the audience. We're not used to seeing that from presidents. We didn't see it with Clinton or the Bushes. It's when you run as an incumbent, part of it is that Obama wasn't really much wanting to call attention to his own record, the ongoing state of the economy. But I just wonder if it just underlines even more, hey, things aren't so great, so that's why he's waving the proverbial brass knuckles.
Well, again, I don't know if it's that much different than it ever was, or are we just remembering it different? I mean, again, I just want to keep coming back to, all I know is that what he did looked very fine and appropriate to me. I've been in politics for 20 years. Compared to an average Texas state legislature floor debate, that was a tea party. Sure. I come from a world where politics is a contact sport. So to me, he could have, piled on a lot more, and I would have been just fine. I don't know how many voters make a decision on things like, do I felt like he felt presidential at the debate, compared to people who make decisions based on, Romney lays out XYZ policy positions at the first debate that utterly contradict things that he said all through those debates in the spring, and Obama didn't call him on them. This time he did, and in some cases, frankly, made Romney look like a fool. I think that's far more important than whether he seemed presidential or not. He is president. Well, you don't have to seem presidential when you are president.
Well, and clearly he's counting on that being the case and people seeing it that way. But, good old moderate Mitt strutting during the first debate and during the second debate. That's the thing, too. Where somebody like me is sitting here going, I told you so. This is who you nominated. For somebody like me that's a true believer on policy, I am profoundly disturbed by this. And I look around at this binary kind of a thing, and I guess that's where I'll start to backtrack chronologically here. The first major thing that happened since we talked was the naming of Paul Ryan to the ticket. It was kind of a surprise. I don't think you and I gave a ton of credence to that at the time. It was looking more like it would be a fellow safe bland establishment creature like Bob McDonnell or Rob Portman. Yeah, we were kind of thinking along those lines. People were saying Rubio. I really didn't kind of see it. Same thing as with Chris Christie. But it's a thing where, again, I look at this kind of a box that they're in, and I kind of felt a little bit bad for Paul Ryan being at the debate there, being saddled with Mitt Romney, because to me, that's what Biden was able to punch him in the mouth on. You've got a guy like Paul Ryan who is a reform-minded kind of a guy, an original thinker, somebody who stands for these kind of things, but he's shackled to a top of the ticket that doesn't much stand for anything and seems to me wants to have it both ways. I've got this young ideas guy on the ticket here, but it's my show.
Can I give you an alternate message or an alternate framing? Romney is shackled to a candidate who has voted against his own ideas regularly and whose ideas are extremely unpopular once you explain them to people. I mean, when Romney picked Ryan, I can't tell you how much excitement there was on the left. Because we're like, great. We can take on their budget, which cuts every single program that normal Americans count on, from college loans to the Medicaid that keeps grandma in the nursing home and not out on the street in the dumpster. So, seriously, man, the left was so excited with Ryan. I have never bought into the meme of Ryan being a deep thinker because his math does not add up. He just says things as though they were true. But when you try to pin him down on them, as people did on the morning shows the other week, the emperor has no clothes. Ryan is an empty suit. And I don't think he helped. To me, nitpicking him showed exactly how much he had to reassure the conservative base. Conservative base loves Paul Ryan, absolutely loves him. But once normal Americans here, I've seen polling on it, once you explain what his positions actually are and not these vague generalities about cutting the deficit, everybody wants to cut the deficit. It's how you do it is the key. Once you explain what it would require, just like with Mitt Romney's tax cut package, well, if you're going to cut the taxes, how are you going to offset that without pulling a Bush and ballooning the deficit? Those things get a lot less popular. And again, that's to me the critical dynamic of this debate was in the first debate, Obama let Romney get away with a lot of that. And the second debate, he didn't.
Couple points on Paul Ryan. First of all, for a guy who projects a balanced budget on his deal in the year 2040, ooh, what a scary extremist, Colin. 28 years to a balanced budget. OMG, the frightening cuts that it's going to take to balance the budget in 28 freaking years, Colin. Oh, my God, what are we going to do?
Well, here's where you and I differ. I don't see a federal government balanced budget as an end in itself. To me, there's no morality. There's no right and wrong with a balanced budget. We've been running a deficit for most of our time since World War I. And as a country, we've done quite well in the meantime.
And this trajectory is sustainable? You think there's trajectory?
Well, I mean, the high deficits we've run in the last few years, the deficits we ran up under Bush were from putting everything on the credit card, right?
Yeah,
the deficits we ran up under Obama are because we were, in an economic hard time, tax revenues go down, but more people need services, right? This is, and actually it's beneficial when interest rates are about 0.5%. This is a time government almost earns money by borrowing into the future. This is the point Paul Krugman makes all the time. A budget deficit or a budget surplus is an instrument of monetary policy, fiscal policy. It's not a moral issue. It gets framed as a moral issue. It gets framed as a moral issue by certain conservatives when they want to cut certain things out of the budget. I love Paul Ryan's deficit plans. I wish he had had that same fervor, and you would agree with this, in 2002, 2004, 2006.
Sure.
When they put in the Medicaid expansion, 2 wars, multiple tax cuts for the rich, put it all on the credit card, turned a budget surplus into a budget deficit in a time with no recession. That's impressive. That takes work.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to argue with you on any of that. On any of that stuff, again, that's my problem with Republicans. They don't care about spending when a Republican is in the White House, and that's what scares me about Mitt Romney as somebody who I think is the third George Bush. You're going to see more of the same, and Republicans excusing it if he gets elected. So all that's true. But as far as it goes with Ryan and with the Ryan, let me just back up here because this is a real clip and save thing potentially here. So you don't really place credence in the notion of us. I'm not even saying short term, medium term, longer term, being like Greece, Spain, whatever, where nobody's going to lend to us at a reasonable price because we're a bunch of deadbeats that clearly aren't going to pay it back. We're never going to pay this back, Colin. We're just going to inflate our way out of it or whatever it's going to be.
Did we ever pay World War II back? No, we followed it with
like 1986, I think.
Yeah, no. We started to pay it back when Bill Clinton was president. It was actually running a surplus. Before that, we just inflated it away.
Minus Social Security, Colin. We raided the Social Security Trust Fund for Clinton's quote-unquote balanced budget. But go ahead.
Did anyone's Social Security benefits go down? If Social Security goes bankrupt, which is the term they love to use, what happens is in 15, 20, 30 years, when that actually occurs in theory, if the projections are correct, people's benefits get cut by 25%, right? Which is bad. It's annoying, but it's not going bankrupt. People use these words so that they can push through policies that they want, not because they're accurate, right? Listen, budget deficits over the long run are a problem, but the deficit hawks have been saying ever since Obama came in that the U.S. was going to run into a Greece-Spain situation where we'd be unable to borrow, blah, blah, blah. I just refinanced. I guarantee you interest rates are a lot lower now than they were 4 years ago, 5 years ago when I bought my apartment. We can borrow money functionally for free. Yes, if we run a massive structural deficit for the next 30 years, it's going to be a real problem. We are still the dominant economy in the world. Everybody flees to American money when there's a problem. That right now, the deficit is being used as an excuse to cut programs that a certain group of people want to cut. And I have a very hard time taking them seriously when the last time they were in power, they ran up debt when we were in good economic times.
Let's talk about both the tax side and the spending side of this thing here, because, again, this is, I think, the dominant issue of this campaign, the effects of those things on the economy and where we're at right now. As far as it goes on the spending side and looking at that, I've talked about this previously on the program. I don't know if it's been in any segments with you, but the conundrum that the Republican Party faces and why it's really been the borrow and spend policies over a period of time is the lack of guts to take on these things frontally. Me, if I was president, I'd take a chainsaw and everybody better friggin' duck. But they're not going to do that because these things are way too popular.
When you're saying
I would slash. I mean, I'd be looking at probably let's say the Rand Paul budget. That about sounds good to me. The timeline he's looking to go on. See, I would be more.
What does Medicaid pay for? Right,
Medicaid.
What's it pay for? I'll tell you. More than half
and elderly. Yeah.
More than half of the spending we do on Medicaid goes for old people in nursing homes, for the middle class old people in nursing homes, because nursing home care is so expensive. What's your alternative? What are you going to do?
There is none. I have an elderly relative who's in that situation right now.
Are you going to put him on the front porch in a recliner and let him die? No, I mean programs. We talk about programs in the abstract, right? But if you cut out, when I worked in the Texas legislature, it was a tough economic time. It was the early 90s. It was a recession. I graduated college in the teeth of a recession. My boss was on appropriations oversight committee over social programs, and he was a conservative Democrat, conservative to his bone. We had to cut eyeglasses for people on Medicaid. We had to cut cancer funding for people on Medicaid because we were trying to save 5% here. Every single thing that we tried to cut was going to either harm someone's life, make it impossible for them to get a job, leave them in a position where they might die. So the thing is, it's easy to talk about programs in the abstract, but and of course there's ways. Of course there is, a lot less than people think. Like, for instance, Medicare is actually far more efficient at delivering services than any private insurance company in America that I've ever heard of, like 3% administrative costs. But what I would say is the Republican Party's weakness in the 2000s was not its unwillingness to cut entitlements. It was unwillingness to say, hey, rich people, you actually are involved in this economy the same way the rest of us are, that you can pay a little money. But and the Republican Party did not used to be the party of tax cuts for wealthy people above all else. That's relatively recent. That's within the last decade and a half. Reagan was far more balanced than that. Reagan raised taxes.
And that's the thing. And again, I'll fight any man that calls me a squish, but that's where I say, look, Republicans do have an obligation to fund the things that people want, because unless you're honest with them and say we want to cut these things and you stand up to the slings and arrows, then you have to fund it. So that's where you and I agree on the pragmatics of it, if not if I lived in a perfect world and I had a chainsaw. But as far as on the tax side, that part of it's interesting as well, Colin, because let me phrase this to you, that it's a thing where I think Obama had an opportunity there. He's not going to do it at this stage of the game. I think he's got an opportunity to make the debate on the Laffer curve, because I would admit, arguably, and I would hope that most of us by this point in time accept the Laffer curve as hard science here, that you do reach a sweet spot.
You realize that no reputable economist would agree with you. None. Zero. No.
Do you think 100% taxation would work? 100%?
No. Oh, absolutely. When Kennedy took the top tax rate from whatever it was, 93% down to 70%, that made a big difference. However, there is no evidence that taking the tax rate from 40% to 35% is a disincentive to economic growth.
And I guess that's my
counter arguments to that.
Oh, right. That there should be a consensus that there is a sweet spot somewhere. We can disagree about where it is, but I think, listen, this might surprise you. I'm actually going to agree on the part here that there are some things you can do. I think we're at the point on the Laffer curve Republicans have been dealing with it the whole time as though we're still Reagan in office, where you would bring in more revenue. Tax cuts don't automatically bring in more revenue. Tax cuts will bring in more revenue if you're at the wrong point of the Laffer curve. I think Obama's got and he's got a chance if he wanted to, and he clearly doesn't care about this, of making the point in almost a conservative kind of a way of like, look, this is not going to dampen growth to do this.
Right. You know, I see what you're getting at. I think it's a good point. The nice thing is he has history to go back to. All you have to do is say, we want the tax rates what they were in the Clinton years. Now, I'm not going to say that because the tax rates were what they were, that the Clinton growth occurred, right? There are a lot of factors going on, although it does seem that the low interest rates that came from how bond traders treated whatever was the 92, 94 budget agreement, basically the thing that set us on track to getting a surplus. Right.
Sure.
The legendary budget vote that passed by one vote in the House, and that poor woman who cast that vote got voted out immediately in upstate New York. Marlise Nazinski, anyway, she sacrificed herself for to help start the 90s economic boom.
And now she's Chelsea's mother-in-law. Imagine that.
Who's her mother-in-law?
She's Chelsea Clinton's mother-in-law. I think Chelsea Clinton married her son.
Right. I completely.
Isn't that some interesting trivia?
Yeah, talking about your pop culture intersection. But
that must be for awkward Thanksgiving. Thanks for costing me my seat, Bill.
She's gone on to fine things, I'm sure. But it's hard to argue that having the tax rate at the Clinton era, which was it, top rate of 39.5% or something like that, it basically like 3 or 4 points higher than it is now. It's hard to argue that somehow crushed the American economy. And I think that one of the things that hurts Romney, Ryan, are these kind of extreme claims, like, for instance, if you let the Bush tax cuts expire, somehow it's going to destroy America. But they're just going back to what they were when we were in really good times, you know? So to me, that kind of undercuts the rhetoric. Does that make sense?
No. I understand what you're saying there. I mean, I do think that, again, particularly the Bush tax cuts, for the middle-income folks, when it's still hard times, you're taking money out of the thing. Yeah, I know what, and your answer would be just revoke it on the higher end, and I get that. I hear the point, and it's again, it's an interesting one, and again, this might be heresy, but myself and one of our other longtime dignitaries on the program, Chris Galloway, who's actually a Republican elected official, we've both said we'd take the 10-for-1 deal. We would do that. I don't think that makes me a squish to do that. Again, you have to. It's got to be verifiable because the Democrats in Congress are always trying to pull one over on you. Ronald Reagan got snookered by them repeatedly throughout the 80s. So it's like dealing with the Soviet Union now, Colin. It's got to be verifiable, but I'd take 10 for 1. I do that.
The problem with any kind of budget deal is that no Congress can bind a future Congress, right?
Right.
That you pass a law and the next Congress can just unpass it or pass something different. So that always, creates uncertainty in this process. Absolutely. And there have been a lot of political promises broken since, the Greeks invented democracy.
Absolutely. The only other thing we haven't really discussed chronologically since last we talked, the conventions here. And again, at this point in time, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in the remaining days of October who sees them as making much of a difference either way. It was a blown opportunity for the Republicans. Romney gave a fairly forgettable speech coming after the Clint Eastwood debacle, where he didn't even have notes on stage. It was just, I didn't think the routine itself was painful so much as he clearly lost his place, and nobody wants to see an 82-year-old man who can't remember what he's supposed to say. Obama got overshadowed by Clinton, so everybody's kind of like, what's up with him? But at this point in time, do you see either of the conventions playing any kind of lingering role as we head down the stretch run of this thing?
Maybe in a few people's minds, but it's hard to imagine them mattering to that many people. I mean, to be honest, and you and I have talked about this before, most of what gets talked about, I can't watch cable news of any variety, right? I can't watch MSNBC. CNN is utterly useless. Fox is, a house organ of the Republican Party now. But I can't watch any of them because, to me, cable news makes you dumber if you watch it, right? But the things that they obsess over are usually not the things that matter. I mean, what I'm looking at is, for instance, $1 that Crossroads GPS spends probably gets them about a quarter of the value that $1 that a presidential campaign spends, right? So if you're going to give your money to Crossroads GPS or to a Democratic alternative, you're not really throwing it away, but it's not nearly as useful as it would be going to the campaign, partly because of the coordination, but also because political candidates can buy ads at the cheap rates, where Crossroads et al. Have to pay the market rate.
Oh,
and
okay.
Here's the kind of thing that actually really matters. Obama's ad buyers banked a bunch of time for the fall back in the summer. They paid really low rates. Romney is apparently buying his TV at the last minute. He's having to pay 2 or 3 times as much. So you're spending equivalent amounts of dollars, and not everywhere, but this is happening in enough places that's been noteworthy. That they may be spending the same amount of money, but Obama's getting twice as many, 2 or 3 times as many ads out of it. Now, I don't think that the 1,000th political ad that somebody sees makes that much of a difference. But this is the kind of thing that the news media really talk about, but it really affects what's happening out in the world.
That's very much true. And when you talk about the effects of the different media organs out there, MSNBC, the night of the first presidential debate, they were kind of predictable. Last night, Fox News calling this debate a draw. In related news, I think Fox News has pronounced the American League Championship Series a draw between the Tigers and the Yankees. So that's the way it goes. And I pointed this out on Twitter last night, Colin, too. If you want to know who won and who lost, and again, I'm not somebody who's part of the quote-unquote echo chamber on my side, see who's bitching about the moderator. Jim Lehrer was hung out to dry by the Democrats after the first one, and then subsequently Martha Raddatz and Candy Crowley. And I've always had a lot of regard for Candy Crowley as an anchor. And like I said, exactly. She's one of the best and the brightest, I think, in the profession. And trying to nail her on this Libya thing, which in and of itself, now, again, I say that as, again, typical me, pox on all their houses. I think Romney politicized it with his initial statement. Right. I think right now there's a cover-up about what exactly happened at Benghazi because it's embarrassing. But I think
it maybe not cover-up, but at least a blame shifting.
There's something fishy going on, and I think it's because it's an election season and they don't want it to come out as being embarrassing to them. But the thing last night, the hair splitting of, did you say act of terror? Did you not say act of terror? I was talking to somebody today and indicated, we were talking about this. If you're outside the echo chamber, do you realize what a horse's ass you look like? If you're John Sununu on TV trying to split hairs, foaming at the mouth about what constitutes when somebody says act of terror, that's one of these things here where, again, these binary echo chambers and the people in there and the points that they're making are just so completely incomprehensible to anybody who's outside of it.
Well, and now let's actually look at that, because I think that's one that's really, kind of interesting to parse, right?
Sure.
Because what are they saying when they're arguing about whether Obama called it an act of terror? What they're really trying to get at is Obama is not with us, right? That it goes back to that old, you're either with us or you're against us. To me, it's part and parcel of the trying to paint him as a Kenyan Muslim socialist. They constantly say he's appeasing. I don't know who he's appeasing. If he appeased, Osama bin Laden with a bullet, that's just fine with me. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. But it's this constant effort to paint him as other. And, Americans have seen the guy in the White House for 4 years. He's not other. He's Barack Obama with a wife named Michelle and 2 kids in middle school. You know what I mean? That, to me, indicates how out of touch they are with what normal people care about, right? And echo chamber is exactly right. Actually, several people that I was reading today were pointing out that the whole thing about Libya may have been a case where the right-wing echo chamber actually really screwed up Mitt Romney, right? Because these guys have been, bloggers, radio, Rush Limbaugh types, have been saying that Obama never called it terrorism, right? And Romney hears that. Romney's people hear that. They come to think it's true. Well, it turns out it ain't true. So listening to people who agree with you sets you up for failure, right? I think it's true for anybody. If I surround myself with people who agree with me, next thing you know, I'm making very bad decisions.
Well, the last thing to say on that before we go to our predictions here, I just want to point out on that, I think as far as it goes with Libya and everything, I do, again, this is without me being one of the Rombot mouth breeders. Look, I'm pretty sick of this administration talking about the YouTube video. The cultural left in this country doesn't have a problem with publicly funded crucifixes in jars of urine. So can we have free speech that applies to everything? You can say, you should say once it's distasteful. That's not what we stand for in America. I'm not calling it the apology tour. I'm not getting into the rhetoric, Colin, but stop talking about the friggin' YouTube video. I think that's what gets people riled up here. To put the emphasis on the terrorists, but again, it goes against the narrative of we killed Al-Qaeda when we killed bin Laden. That's where I see it as something like that. So I've got a slightly more benign reading of it for people who believe what they believe, if not the Romney people. I don't have a benign reading on them.
All right, so what's going to happen in 3 weeks, my friends?
All right, I'm looking at it here. Ironically, I'm going to go back to just about the same prediction. I was wrong 4 years ago. I called it as being a little closer. I think I said 290 on the Electoral College. It was more like about 350. I'm going to say about 290 this time. I'm going to say about 51.5 for Obama. So more or less what I mistakenly thought it was going to be when I mistakenly thought McCain was going to make it close. I thought McCain had like a Jimmy Carter 1976 thing going on where you come up just short, and he kind of didn't. So that was a false cut. But that's the numbers I'm going to go with. What say you?
Well, okay, so I'm going to guess it's about, I don't know what the exact numbers are going to be. I'm going to say it's about a 3-point margin. All right?
Okay, I'm saying 3.5, so we're close.
Yeah, so about 3-point margin. Now, here's the thing. The national polls are closer than the battleground polls. Now, although some of that has changed recently, we need to see how much that's going to hold. You know, when you're talking about state polls, you're often talking about small numbers. So, you know, we need to look at over a period of weeks whether that sticks. But I have a feeling, being from Texas, that places like Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, basically a lot of the old Confederacy, are going to go against Obama in such high numbers that it skews the national results a little bit. So, again, I think the margin will only be about 3 points. It wouldn't surprise me if the Electoral College margin is about 310. I think Dems hold the Senate by 1 seat, and I think we maybe gain like 6 or 8 seats in the House, and that's about it.
That's about it. I actually think the Democrats may I think they may have about 52 Senate seats by the time it's all said and done, which is a hell of a dropped ball for the Republicans. And as far as it goes on the presidential side, any chance whatsoever, because of the dynamic you're talking about here, any chance it's a repeat of 2000? Popular winner Romney, electoral winner Obama?
Ooh, that's tough. I think if that were going to be true, I think it would have to be a lot closer on the Electoral College front. It's certainly possible. I think the overall margin has to be a lot tighter. You'd have to have about a half-point margin. Because, the North-South is still, California has more people than half of the Confederacy does, right?
That's true.
But, Obama will win California by a solid margin, but he won't win it by the kind of margin that Romney's going to win Oklahoma.
Not with $5 gas, he won't.
Well, and I'll tell you, over the long run, the thing that may matter in this election more than anything else is how many young Latino voters are being swung to the Democrats, not so much by Romney now, but by the Republicans during the primaries and by the Tea Party's attitude on immigration. If the Republican Party basically becomes the party of the old white South, it will not survive as a national party.
That's true. And that's something that's the demographics are going to be something that's going to have to be dealt with in the next couple of elections here. There are people like me that are hoping that the culturally conservative tendencies of the Latinos are going to win out, but that's going to be very, very interesting to see how that breaks. But it is always interesting to break it down on the program with you, my friend, and I look forward to doing so again. Once this thing's done, when we got a new Congress coming back in, when whatever administration is getting ready to get going in January, and take a look ahead at what should be a very consequential year at the end of this thing. But thank you so much, as always, my